Our guest today is former Speaker of the House Robert W. O'Donnell. Bob O'Donnell was first elected to the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 1974. He became Speaker of the House in 1990 following the death of James Mandarino and served as Speaker until 1992. Today he is an attorney in Philadelphia whose primary practice is government relations. He also teaches state and local government law at Drexel University School of Law. He has dealt with a wide variety of issues but has a particular expertise in education and municipal finance. Bob has served on several dozen public boards and commissions, including the University of Pittsburgh and the Federal Home Loan Bank. And he has served as president of the Electoral College of Pennsylvania. He is a veteran of more than 100 political campaigns from the ward level to the presidential level. He has received numerous awards from organizations such as Common Cause and the League of Cities and has received honorary doctorate degrees from Arcadia University and Philadelphia University. Bob O'Donnell.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity for this conversation and especially for the very distinguished assemblage here. And it's always a danger to introduce someone and not someone else. But first, I would like to acknowledge the President's presence of our new Treasurer-elect, Rob McCord. Rob, would you? And I want to thank you, Brian, for that very kind introduction. What was left off of my resume was two things that I'm most proud of. One is my marriage to Dr. Donna Gentile O'Donnell, who is with me today. Donna, would you stand up? And also the fact that I am the proud father and a proud grandfather. And my youngest son, on leaving college and entering the workforce, made the observation that adulthood was overrated. And I've thought about that, and he has, as with most Americans, has shouldered the responsibilities of adulthood with significant success. But there is still always the temptation, particularly among the electorate adults, to slough off the responsibilities of adulthood and take a, let's say, less than mature approach. For example, the folks want more government than they're willing to pay for. That is a fact of life. And the answer to that apparent contradiction is to eliminate the waste, corruption, and inefficiency in government. If only they would do that, then we could have all the government we want and not have to pay for another dime. The folks also are committed to the idea that pork, as part of the waste and inefficiency, pork should be eliminated, but their elected representatives should bring home the bacon. The contradiction here is not readily apparent, but in some ways writ large, because every government in history has had to entertain two ideas that are in tension, if not outright contradictory. And that is the philosophy of government that as something we do together that we can't do very well individually. The other idea is that government is actually a pie to get whacked up. It's kind of a spoil system. And the spoil system and the notion of government as solving problems exist together and in tension in every government in history, including in Pennsylvania. To further explore these contradictions, the personal experience of voters with their elected legislators, for example, is almost uniformly positive. And yet, as an electorate, as a body, they entertain the idea that the legislature is self-serving, politically motivated, and dominated by special interests, even though that collective idea runs directly counter to their personal experience. Now, I mention all these things because my background and in some ways my interest is in the legislature, and the attitude of the folks is an important context in which this legislature has to operate. Second external element for this legislature is the continuing threat of prosecutors and grand juries. It was observed, I think, by Jefferson that the people are not safe when the legislature is in session. Well, I think it may now be fairly said that the legislature is not safe as long as the grand jury is in session. Now, this creates some very, very immediate and very compelling kinds of dangers for individuals, but also creates a potential damage for the legislature as an institution. And particularly in a world where it's not clear what the rules are or how consistently they will be enforced. Currently, there appears to be a consensus that the use of political office or public resources for any political or personal gain is in itself a criminal act. It's not clear to me then whether Karl Rove would be subject to prosecution. It's not clear to me that David Axelrod in the next administration will be amenable to prosecution. They're, after all, avowedly using the public payroll for a political purpose. There was an interesting article in the Philadelphia Inquirer a short time ago, and the article was interesting for most folks because it was a story about a fellow who worked in the court system in Philadelphia as what's called a personal. And he apparently got the job because he was married to the judge's sister. He went into the judge and announced that he was divorcing the sister, and he was immediately transferred to the labor pool and subsequently fired. But the reason why I found this story interesting was because his job description, which everybody in Philadelphia knows and perhaps very few outside Philadelphia know, is he's called a personal. That is to say, his duties, which are actually recited in the Inquirer, are to run personal errands for the judge, pick up the dry cleaning, etc., etc. Now, there is a question that arises here about if that's the rule, how consistently will it be applied? Can we expect federal indictments of the 100 or so judges in Philadelphia and perhaps judges on the appellate bench? Because people on the public payroll are being used for personal purposes. Now, that may strike you as fairly trivial, but for those of you that are following the trial of Senator Fumo, a substantial part of his indictments had to do with exactly that idea. The Evening Bulletin did an expose recently on the governor's involvement with a law firm and with public entities, et cetera, et cetera. So are we to expect now a grand jury focused on the governor? Actually, I think not. I think not because the judiciary and the executive have resources to bring to bear that will keep them essentially out of harm's way. So the second element, in my opinion, which creates a context for the legislature, is this prosecutorial presence. And I think the legislature is uniquely vulnerable to that, and I think potentially very damaging. I hesitate to bring up the next idea, but I'm compelled in the interest of candor. I had a conversation, by the way, with John Baer, whom I'm sure you all know, who, despite his sunny disposition, was able to lay out a scenario, the bottom line of which was just be candid. So therefore, in that spirit, I'm compelled to tell you that the third element external to the legislature, which I think is going to be troublesome, is the press. Now, the approach of the press, I think, was best articulated by that philosopher, Michael Corleone, in which he described for